welcome to the next edition of Data Talks, and it's a very special edition because it's with my co-founder Homi Kharas, co-founder of World Data Lab, long-term friend and also previous boss of the World Bank. Homi has a very long career, very long successful career, and I think, Homi, what is special about you, and I try to follow in your footsteps, is that you left the World Bank at a time that you then still transitioned to new careers. So tell us a bit about your time at the World Bank before you went academia, but then also the transition to your current life and especially the work on the SDGs.
Well, I had a phenomenal time at the World Bank. I spent a little bit more than 26 years there. I worked in every region in the world. I went to multiple countries, and even though I was always at the World Bank, I always felt that I was changing jobs every 3 or 4 years, because every time I moved within the organization, it was to a new challenge. And it's a place with the most extraordinary people and the most extraordinary mission. And that combination was something that was just very appealing to me, and I learned an enormous amount at that institution. Then, when I left the bank, I joined the Brookings Institution. Brookings is a think tank in Washington, D.C., and our former president of the World Bank, Jim Wolfenson, had set up a center to study developing economies at Brookings. And he invited me to join him, and I joined him. And from that center, I got an invitation to work with the United Nations on what they were calling the post-2015 agenda. So the United Nations had set up a very ambitious agenda for countries to achieve what we call the Millennium Development Goals. Those goals, this was in 2012, those goals were approaching the end, and they wanted to know what now. And very crudely, there were two big options that our panel consisted of. They had established a very high-profile panel with then serving Prime Minister of the UK, David Cameron, serving President of Indonesia, President Yudhoyono, and the serving President of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. So three heads of state to convene a number of experts to debate what should come next. And basically, they debated two options. One option was take the Millennium Development Goals as written and bring them to an end. Most of the Millennium Development Goals were set as halve the rate of poverty, or do something, make progress in something. And so one option was just, it's working well, let's take it and finish, was so-called finish the job. A different option, which ultimately was what was recommended by the panel, was to actually broaden the agenda, broaden it to include issues of sustainability, which by and large had been excluded from the Millennium Development Goals, and broaden it to include all countries of the world, not just low-income countries of the world. And that document became the basis of the negotiations in New York of the Sustainable Development Goals, and it was agreed by all countries, 193 countries, in September of 2015 to set the development agenda for 2015 to 2030. And so here we are, just over halfway through the SDGs.
Congratulations, Homi, for achieving that. One part of the SDGs is also the so-called data revolution, which now brings us here together. Tell us how that came about.
Well, I think throughout my career, I've always been very empirically oriented. And so the first thing that I wanted to do is to present to the panel the data and the facts of what was going on with development in developing countries. And the more I looked, the more disappointed I was in how poor the data was. Much of the data that we were using was actually modeled data. It wasn't based on any real observations. Household surveys were out of date. National accounts hadn't been rebased for many years. Nobody really knew where people lived, how many people there were. The basic demographics weren't good. So it became quite clear that it was very difficult to actually talk in a meaningful fashion about development without a much better empirical base. And so we decided to advocate for something that we called a data revolution, where we would put much more emphasis on building the capacities of national statistical offices in developing countries.
You just mentioned we're halfway through the SDGs. How do you think the data revolution is going?
Well, I think the data revolution is actually going up quite well. I think we're much better informed. Unfortunately, that also means that we're better informed on our failures as well as our successes. And so I think we can say with much more confidence now that the SDGs are not going well. And before we might have relied on anecdotes, and you can always find anecdotes of success in lots of places and try to put a better gloss on things. But I think with the data that we really have, we know that in many countries things are just not going so well, and that's almost across the board in sustainability. It's true about human capital development. In many places, we've stalled with the rate of improvement of vaccinations. We've stalled on educational outcomes. It's true on sustainability. We're not bringing global emissions down. We're not spending enough on adaptation. And it's stalled on governance, where the whole movement towards transparency and better governance has been overtaken to some degree with now more single party dominated countries, and in some places more coups and even wars.
Which brings us also a little bit to when we started World Data Lab together, Homi, and maybe remind the viewers, at least of your recollection, how it started. We always, I think, talk of a dinner in New York and the napkin, I think, where we drew some part of World Data Lab, or at least a data model we planned to do together. So tell us about the
Yeah,
viewers.
you and I were just talking about this, talking about the data revolution, but then also talking not just about the problem, but about how we could actually do something to help solve it. And so we talked about, well, if we actually had a little bit better data, we could do this and we could do that. And we started to write down all these things that we could do. I remember you'd done all this work on demographics with worldpopulation.io. And not just the data, but ways of communicating the data. And I think that was one of the very attractive things about world population. You were gamifying demographic data to get people to know and understand and interact with data. And so we thought, well, let's try to do the same thing initially with poverty. And we wrote out what we could do on poverty. But I think the idea was to get people excited by data and get data, stop data from just being numbers on a spreadsheet to being really something that you could engage with, interact with, and learn about people's lives.
Very nice theme, going beyond the spreadsheet. If you would put it differently, Homi, there's obviously the World Bank, there's the UN, there's Brookings, there's other players. what space do you think World Data Lab fills that other players don't?
Well, we set out and I think, spent a little bit of time thinking about our mission. And ultimately, our mission was make everyone count. And there's a double meaning to that. There's the meaning of make sure we've got data and information so that we understand the lives of every individual. And one of the big themes of the SDGs was leave no one behind, not talk about averages, talk about every individual. And so that was one of the things. And then the other part of make everyone count was make sure that everyone is literate, make sure that everybody knows and understands the data of the world in which they're living. So I think it was that spirit, I think, that we brought to World Data Lab that some of the other organizations and institutions are still just in the business of producing the data rather than really worrying about exactly how it's going to be used.
It's very interesting how you frame it. Also, if you think of everyone count, because we always then associate the poorest and the most vulnerable, and that should be the first instinct. But then, as we did this work together, Homi, it's actually the whole distribution, as we always call it, that really understand those vulnerable better and the middle class. And you yourself are associated with the, you are, all humility, the global expert on the middle class. So tell us about that connection between different income levels and different life stages, and then how your middle class work started.
Well, if you think about it, the world today is just upwards of 8 billion people. The number of people who are living in extreme poverty, as defined by the World Bank, even now after the World Bank has raised its poverty line, is just over 700 million. So that's less than 10% of the world. And frankly, there was no real institution that was concentrating on the data of most of the people in the developing world. And we had some big successes in emerging markets, including in places like China, 1.4 billion people developing at sometimes growth rates of over 10% for one or two decades. And the problems of those kinds of countries were quite different. We'd already seen in Latin America many middle-income countries get stuck, the so-called middle-income trap. And one of my final publications at the World Bank was about a the existence of middle-income traps and how there was a potential for East Asian countries that I was working on at the time who were. There was lots of talk about the Asian century. They might be in danger of falling into a middle income trap. And so we also started to think very hard about the lives of middle class people in these middle income countries. And that was the origins of my fascination with the middle class in developing countries. That I believe now is one of the most dynamic driving forces of the global economy as a whole.
Well put, Homi. And middle class is also is a concept so many use in many countries, politicians, economists, and beyond. But it's, as you said, it is probably one of the most underestimated megatrends, but it's also often misunderstood. Walk us a bit through why people misunderstand so often the concept of the middle class.
I think class in general has often been associated with an individual country. Even poverty, people have national countries, most countries have national poverty lines, and they have their own national definitions of the middle class. They have their own national definitions of many things. They have their own national definitions of cities. And, you know, working at a multilateral institution, my experience had always been one where we were trying to compare across countries and to have a single definition that was comparable. And we did that with poverty. That wasn't my invention. People had set global poverty thresholds, and I'd seen the power of that. But nobody had ever set a global middle class threshold. And I thought, well, that's actually something that I know how to do. And I did some research and came up with a global middle class threshold so that we could identify and track how the middle class was doing as a separate insight into these economies. And I think that's proven to be a very valuable insight because ultimately the performance of that middle class is actually what is driving most of these emerging economies.
And indeed, it drives global economy. By our estimate, the middle class consumes, as you said, it's more than half of the people, and it consumes 60% of the total spending.
Yeah, maybe
When
70
you
trillion US dollars.
Absolutely. And when you think of it, Homi, though, when you ask people, especially in the US and West, people always think the middle class is under pressure or shrinking. But then, building on your guidance, we always develop this middle class sharp estimate, and it always shows it's north of 100 million or sometimes 120 plus million. Why do you think people misperceive the dynamics of the middle class too often?
Well, I think in advanced economies, which where the middle class became dominant, probably in many countries it reached 80, 90% of the population. The middle class has actually seen it's being split. So in very rich countries like the United States, the many people who were in the middle class are graduating to become what I would call rich. And what do I mean by rich? I simply mean people who, when they want something, they don't really worry about what economists would call a budget constraint. If they want something, they go out and buy it. So there are a large number of people now in the United States who are rich, but then there were also people who were falling back below the middle class thresholds into a group that we call vulnerable, weren't performing very well, whose wages weren't keeping up with inflation, who were having difficulties in meeting their grocery bills, where housing prices were going up. So you had that kind of two, you know, two different experiences of the middle class, and really the middle class as we used to know it was splitting in two, and that's a very different phenomenon from what we see in emerging markets where you have very few really rich people. You still have some millionaires, especially in the Chinas and Indias of this world. But most of the people who are entering the middle class are entering from situations of poverty and vulnerability. And so you still are getting globally every year upwards of 100 million additional people entering into the middle class. It's a big number and a lot of consumption that is happening because of that trend.
And I can really confirm that power of that clear threshold. Obviously, it's important also to think of different threshold of the upper middle class, lower middle class, because people buy different goods and services, and that's what actually also companies often don't get right. And many of the companies we work with really appreciate that consistency. So I think our viewers, home, can relate to this very much. So with that, let's go to the future. Obviously, the world is, some would say, in turbulence. So a lot of new shifts happening, a lot of megatrends intersecting. If you look till 2035, what are some of the big forces that you think will drive the economies of the world and the middle class specifically?
Well, I would say there are two real megatrends. One which is already set in motion and that we have a lot of information about, and the other which is generating tremendous uncertainty. And so the first is demography, and the second is technology. And so on demography, I think in every region of the world, we except one, we've already reached what some people call peak babies. The number of children under 5 has already peaked and is starting to actually decline. Populations are aging. The share of the labor force in the economy is declining. The one exception is Africa. And in Africa, you still have population growth rates, and the increase in African youth is a very powerful force. And economists have talked about that as potentially being a demographic dividend, but there's always that word potentially in front of it. And the question is, for policy, is how do we make sure that that potential dividend translates into an actual dividend? Because Africa is not at the moment growing rapidly as it should, given its resources, both natural and human. So that's one big trend that is going to affect every country in the world in different ways, and countries are responding in very different ways in terms of their migration policy and other kinds of policies. And then on the other side, we have technology, and technology dominated by AI. And we don't really know how AI is going to affect jobs or productivity. The positive news about AI is that it holds the promise for huge leapfrogging in technology, especially for in many developing countries. Just like developing countries were able to leapfrog with communications technologies, and now almost everybody in the developing world has a some kind of a mobile access to a mobile phone device. Doesn't have to be a smartphone, but some kind of a device, and that's changed their lives enormously. Now we have AI, which has a similar possibilities for a real technological revolution. Some people worry that it's going to, take away jobs, um, but others look back at history and say for every job that's taken away, there are two more jobs that are created, in jobs in sectors and in places that we never knew existed. So I don't think we anybody really has a very clear idea of exactly how this is going to affect different countries. But one of the things that AI does is it democratizes data and information. And just to take this back to the origins of our story, we always felt that one of the things that was really lacking and holding back emerging economies was the lack of good information and technologies. And so, just based on that, my ultimate belief is that these technological forces are going to be very good for development. They're not going to be a problem or a struggle for development.
And Homi, what do you think will AI do to economics? And feel free to give the viewers also some sense of how you will suggest that World Data Lab embodies and has embodied AI in its modeling.
You know, what AI can do is it can synthesize uh, experience. And we always talk in the economic policy world about best practices. Well, how many best practices? AI can tell you almost instantaneously. We always wonder about civic participation in decision making. Well, AI can synthesize not just a small room of, let's say, a town hall of, you know, 30, 50, maybe even 100 people, but thousands of, or even millions of people. We can reach people in places which have never had access to global education. Think of a farmer who sees his crop, doesn't quite know what pests are eating the crop, can now take a picture of his crop, send it to an AI bot, doesn't have to reach a trained individual, send it to an AI bot and get an instant reading of what he should do. We have AI in health, which could completely revolutionize life expectancy. We will have AI in education. So, in every field that you can think of, AI has the potential to really boost productivity, and that I think is the promise of the future. It's this leapfrogging that becomes possible, and efficiency. And anybody who's been to a city in a developing country knows that some things like urban planning and the efficiency of the cities hasn't been not that much attention has been paid to it. I think with AI we can do much better. No more traffic jams. That's my hope.
Okay, that's a good one, Homi. So as we conclude, Homi, share with the viewers of your priorities as chief economist at World Data Lab and what our clients and viewers can expect from us over the next year or two.
Well, I think we're developing data. We can identify where the most promising markets are. We can identify in what places. Is it in which cities are growing most rapidly? We can identify in which categories. We can identify which generations. What people don't realize sometimes is that if you take Africa, for example, Africa is now already dominated by Gen Zers. The US is dominated by baby boomers and Gen Xers in the marketplace. So every time you go to a different place, there's a whole different economic world that you need to understand. We, I think, have that ability to help companies figure out that understanding, identify their growth opportunities and strategies, and then give them benchmarks against which they can measure whether they're being successful at penetrating these economies or not. So if you just think about simple things, where the iPhone market in the US is probably relatively speaking saturated. Yes, you can have a new model and get people to change, but if you want to sell millions more iPhones, you would probably look outside of the US. So all these companies are, when they're thinking about expansion and growth strategies, have to be looking at where the growth is happening. And that's really happening in emerging economies, especially in terms of numbers of people who are able to purchase your commodities.
Well, very nice framing, quantifying different economic worlds. I think that very much fits us. So, Homi, we conclude with a question I'll ask every of my guests, which is, what's your favorite number? And tell us the story behind the number.
Yeah, my favorite number is 17, and that's for the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And I think what's interesting about the story is that if you most people who are managers would say impossible to focus on 17 different things. This is way too broad and unfocused. We've got to narrow it down. And indeed, in my original efforts to think about this, I was really trying to keep that number under 10. So I actually had a 3 by 3 matrix of different kinds of things. But actually, 17 has the property of being a number which encompasses the aspirations of these very different societies that we have across the globe. It's not something that we forced on the system. It's something that emerged out of everybody saying, these are my priorities and these are my priorities. And so when you wanted to think about, well, so then what should we worry about as a world community where everyone counts? Then you have to go to 17. And then I started to think, well, do most countries have at least 17 ministries to manage their own affairs? The answer was absolutely, and many countries have way more than 17. So it's not an unmanageable number. It is, in fact, a number that's even smaller than what most countries have in terms of their national administrative structures. So I think it's a good number. and it's a number that has helped us to quantify objectives for the global economy. And that quantification is very useful in helping us set policy, keeping us to account, and telling us whether we're on track or off track. So it's a powerful number. And it's a prime number to boot. So that gives it some added appeal.
Comes the mathematician, the magic number 17, and congratulations, Homi, for managing that process. Indeed, SDGs, everybody can relate to it. Almost every person on the planet can relate to them, which was not clear when you started the process. And what we'll do with WDL will be even bigger. So with that, thank you so much, Homi, and thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, Wolfgang. Pleasure talking.